This is his first interview to India Today after assuming office here in New Delhi. I'm being joined by the Australian High Commissioner to India, High Commissioner Philip Green. Thank you so much for joining us here on India Today.
Great to be here.
We're looking at a very strong India-Australia relationship. There have been the 2+2 dialogue that took place. We were looking at a visit sooner than later of the Prime Minister. But where do you see in terms of stock taking as the High Commissioner over here? Prime Minister Modi is completing his second term. He looks strong, moving towards a third term. In the coming year, what's on the agenda?
Great question, Geeta. We're really at a very exceptional point. The second term of the Modi government has marked a new high in Australia-India relations that we've never seen before. India is now a country with which we have a free trade agreement, with which you have a 2+2 foreign and defence dialogue, with which we have an annual leaders meeting. There's only one other country on the planet that we have that sort of close multidimensional relationship. So we also have a very high level of personal affinity between our leaders. So it's a particularly high point. You asked me where we're going. Well, the first half of this year will be dominated by elections in India. For me, that's a period to get ready for the second half where we drive forward from this point. What I would like to see, greater cooperation between Australia and India in key strategic fields like maritime domain awareness, concluding the second stage of the free trade agreement with the SECA, and doing even more to support the links between what we call the human bridge, that very large number of people of Indian origin in Australia who make such a strong contribution to our bilateral.
Right. You just spoke about economic cooperation. So let's just focus on that. The Australia-India Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement came into force on December 29, 2022. But in terms of any changes on the ground, in terms of really moving forward, you're looking at a second round on the FTA. Have you seen a real change?
Oh, in terms of ECTA, we've seen a dramatic change. So let me give you a couple of examples. Indian exports of clothing, apparel, have gone up by nearly 10% since the ECTA was in place. Indian exports of agricultural goods are up by 16%. The utilisation rate of the free trade agreement by Indian and Australian businesses is over 75%. That's the highest utilisation rate that India has with any of its free trade agreements. So, you know, when Piyush Goyal says that this means lakhs of jobs for India, that is turning into reality. So, you know, we're very excited with what we've done, but it leaves us still with a very strong aspiration to complete this with a multidimensional SECA agreement.
But what are the areas where you see a roadblock on the economic cooperation or conclusion of a free trade agreement?
Well, look, you know, I mostly see opportunity. Our economies are very complementary. India is a place with a huge number of very talented people. Some of them need more skills. Australia is a vast continent with a huge amount of energy and resources that India needs to drive the next part of its growth. So, you know, I want Australian critical minerals, we're the largest exporter in the world. I want Australian critical minerals to be driving new renewable plants in India. I want Australian green iron ore part of India's green steel supply chain. I want Australian cotton and wool to be part of Make in India for textiles in this country. The fact that we have such different economies means that we can strongly benefit from trade. So I'm very optimistic. Oh, and one other thing. I want to see even more young Indians trained by Australian institutions, because here's another area of complementarity. India has a lot of young people. People tell me 20 million people turn 18 every year here. A lot of them need training, notwithstanding the high quality of the Indian tertiary sector. And Australia has an abundance of tertiary institutions which are looking to support that.
We'll talk about that because that certainly has been a very important area when it comes to vocational training and how many Indians actually look to Australia for that, and universities coming into India. But before that, let's look at the security cooperation between the two sides. Now, Australia has been part of a lot of multilaterals lately, has been a part of a lot of important security blocs as well. When it comes to India and Australia, we are seeing a lot of bilateral cooperation as well when it comes to security and maritime. How much of that focus is towards the aggression that we see from China? How much of the focus and the conversations that you have on security and maritime focuses really on China?
Well, let me put it this way. What we do in our region, and we do a lot, is much more focused on what we're trying to secure, which is positive, than rather than being focused on a particular country. So we want a region which is free and open. We want a region where freedom of navigation prevails. We want a region where smaller states can make their own sovereign choices and don't feel coerced. We want a region which is free of ills like piracy, people smuggling, and so on. And India is a key partner for us in that, especially in the Indian Ocean, but actually right across the domains of the Indo-Pacific. Now, you ask about China. We are stabilising our relationship with China. That's important. I don't think there's a country on earth that wants an unstable relationship with China. That's a good thing. Doesn't mean that we don't have disagreements with China. You will have recently seen that Australian Navy divers in the water were subject to effect of a sonar. Australia will speak out very clearly when things like that happen, which are dangerous and unprofessional.
But the fact is that China has been a concern, not just for Australia, but for India as well. And India also has been engaging China in terms of ensuring that there is a positive outcome to various aspects of concerns between the two countries. How does Australia really view the border tensions that we see between India and China, the conversations that are taking place between New Delhi and Beijing?
Well, we don't want any unilateral change in the status quo. We think that dialogue and working within normal rules and norms is the right way to deal with this. It's important that we have dialogue with China in order to work through the bilateral issues that we may have from time to time. And that's what my government has been doing in recent months, is re-establishing a level of dialogue with China, which means that we can work through problems as well as working through opportunities.
Quad is one such area that has been a concern for China. China has looked at Quad not so kindly, while the focus has been on various economic cooperation between and amongst all the Quad partners, and less of focus on military. But we are looking at a future where Quad could play a very important role. There was to be a Quad meeting around Republic Day, which is not really taking place. Did Australia really give a date? How did it pan out? And how do you view this rescheduling of the Quad summit?
Oh, look, the first thing is that our Prime Minister is deeply committed to the Quad and would be prepared within reason to come to India on any date to have a meeting. Scheduling the meeting was entirely up to the Prime Minister of India. He's the chair, and I'll leave it to him to make comments about when and where we might have a Quad meeting. But Quad's a very important deliverable in this region. And as you said at the start, this is my first interview for you. The last time I was in your country was in 2019, and then I was running the Quad file in Canberra. And, at that time, I used to come to India and talk about Quad. At that point, we were having occasional meetings at senior officials level without any scripted agenda and occasionally issuing a very short communique. Right? And now we have annual leaders' meetings, a very deliberate agenda, working groups that are working through issues week by week, month by month. I mean, when I think about those 4 or 5 years, the development of the Quad is really dramatic, and I think a very powerful influence on the way in which the arc of history of the Indo-Pacific will evolve.
You're actually echoing what Dr. Jaishankar just said in Nigeria, where he was speaking about how the country has grown in confidence. And in that he said that there was a time when India, because of a certain country, would not elevate the level of Quad participation. And now you see a leadership level participation. Do you agree with Dr. Jaishankar? You've just echoed it, but in terms of confidence, do you see a more confident India in engaging irrespective of what other countries think or say, whether it is China or the other Russia-Ukraine war or other conflicts, that it has a stand and a stance of its own?
I do see a more confident India, and Australia welcomes that. This is now the 5th biggest economy of the world, growing by more than 7% per annum. It has interrelationships with countries around the planet that are powerful. It has hosted an extremely successful G20 and forged a conclusion when many thought they couldn't. Now, Geeta, that means that every country on earth needs to be more interested in India. But I come from a country that is adjacent to India, shares a democratic heritage with India, has a profound belief in a free and open Indo-Pacific, and has a highly interdependent and complementary economy with India. So I haven't even mentioned cricket, but there's lots of reasons why we are very interested in engaging with your country at the moment, and we're making the most of every opportunity.
Most of every opportunity. Let's talk about the education sector then.
Yep.
We just spoke about, and you just spoke about vocational training, having students go there for a higher education, but also skill sets. But you also have a university coming to India, first of its kind university basing itself out of India. How do you see India as the future hub for higher education? We still have a long way to go, but how do you see that really pan out?
So this is really exciting. The government of Gujarat opened the opportunity for universities to have foreign branch campuses in Gift City. Of all of the universities in the world, only 2 have taken up that opportunity. They both happen to be Australian. The Deakin University opened their beautiful campus just last week at Vibrant Gujarat, and the University of Wollongong plans to follow within a few short months. So we have a long and very happy history of Indian students coming to Australia. India will need a lot of training. Young people need a lot of training. A lot of more Indian students will continue to come to Australia. But it shouldn't be a one-way street. And having foreign branch campuses in India means that more people can be trained. But guess what? It means advantages for Indian households. It means that that training and the quality of an Australian degree can be achieved at a fraction of the cost. And secondly, it means that families don't have to be separated with their loved ones a long way away for a few years, however nice it might be for people to live in Australia for a while. But so it provides a new option for Indian students to be able to get a first-class Australian education, and we are very proud that Australian institutions are leading this.
You make a very important point, High Commissioner. You say that only 2 universities, and that too from Australia, came. You think other countries are reluctant because this is a huge economy. Higher education itself is a huge, it contributes largely to the economy of a country, and Indians really look to going abroad and studying. Is that why there could be reluctance? Should India be looking at developing universities within rather than looking at foreign universities coming in?
Well, look, you'd have to ask other ambassadors what the intentions of the other countries are, but I do think there is something very innovative and entrepreneurial about Australian vice-chancellors and their staff, and I see that as they come through here. And you know that now the Indian government, under the National Education Policy, is going to allow foreign branch campuses not just in Gift City, but in other places in India as well. And there's a lively interest from Australian universities in taking that opportunity. University of Western Sydney, already interested in establishing a campus perhaps in Bangalore to focus on STEM and on agriculture, and a consortium of Australian universities is also looking to establish campuses here. So the interest of Australian universities in being more active in the sector here just goes from strength to strength.
The other aspect, very focused on Australia, the Israel-Hamas war,
Yep.
and Australia's stand. We're looking at the Red Sea over here and how the US-UK forces in support coming in from Australia is taking on the Houthis. How do you see this entire situation really pan out, the stand that Australia has taken when it comes to Houthis, Iran-backed Houthis, as opposed to civilian deaths in Gaza?
Well, of course, we are involved in the actions in the Gulf to support shipping by trying to end the Houthi attacks. But let's look at the underlying problem we have here and the humanitarian situation for women and children and people in Gaza is dire, and that's of very great concern to us. We decry Hamas's terrorism and its attacks and its use of human shields. And Hamas needs to be dealt with, but in the balance needs to be very strongly placed the humanitarian interests of people in Gaza who are suffering so much at the moment. Our government has been strongly supporting humanitarian pauses, but we hope that those humanitarian pauses will be on the way towards a sustainable ceasefire. But here's the thing, Geeta, that ceasefire can't be one way. It means that Hamas needs to stop its terrorist attacks, and we need to make sure that people in Gaza can re-establish normal life, because the situation at the moment there is dire.
Your staff is asking me to end quickly, but before I let you go, a question on Khalistan. We have a huge Indian community in Australia, and Khalistan has been a concern when it comes to violent actions against Indian diplomats, Indian missions, or even intending to be violent against Indian diplomats. Certainly is a huge concern. How do you look at the turn of events in the recent past, whether if it is the killings of Khalistanis, or for that matter, now we're looking at how India has raised concerns with various countries on Khalistani elements on their soil?
Well, let's focus on what goes on in Australia. You know, we have a multicultural population with people who've come from all over the world. It's not unusual that we find that there is sometimes divisions of opinion within those societies. We're used to that. We have really good systems to deal with it. So we strongly support the democratic right to protest. And if people want to make a peaceful protest, they can make it. But here's the thing, we are very focused on the security and dignity of Indian diplomats and their premises, and our authorities are acutely active to make sure that where there is peaceful protest, it stays within a normal range.
And finally, before I let you go, we've had the inauguration of the Ram Temple yesterday. It was a huge, huge event done with a lot of pomp and circumstance. There is, again, a huge Indian community in Australia. How does Australia look at this entire event, and what really happened in Australia if you followed anything with regards to the Indian community there?
Well, I certainly followed the Indian community there, and let me say, first of all, I happened to be driving around New Delhi quite a lot yesterday, and it was striking to see the large number of people on the streets waving flags, clearly enjoying the moment, and visiting temples and so on. In Australia, I mean, I can only tell you what I've seen on our news media, which is that there was also some excitement at the event in Australia. I will be talking to people about this question over weeks and months ahead and forming some opinions. At the moment, all I can tell you is that I did see quite a lot of celebration yesterday.
On that note, High Commissioner Green, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today.
Thank you very much, Geeta.